Water towers. Odds are you see one every day, but as critical infrastructure, they're off limits to the public. You're not allowed to get very close, and they're guarded behind layers of security. But today, I'm taking you on top and down inside of one. We have to climb a maze of ladders to reach the top, then hoist up each piece of diving gear by hand, stage our equipment, and suit up the divers just inches from the edge. Then we send our diver inside, and he's going all the way to the bottom. Water towers aren't all built the same. There's multi-column towers that have the old school looking design that feature a steel tank supported on a cluster of legs reinforced with horizontal struts and diagonal tie rods to keep everything stable under that massive weight. There's composite elevated tanks with a massive steel bowl that sits on a hollow, high-strength concrete pedestal. These are popular because the concrete base can actually double as a secure municipal facility. And then there's standpipes. These are the giant vertical cylinders that, unlike the others, the tank sits on the ground and extends straight up. And this is the type that we'll be working on today. Almost all of these water towers house critical communication infrastructure on top. Rather than build a separate standalone cell tower, which is extremely expensive and considered an eyesore to most, engineers use the height of the water tower to mount cellular transmitters and emergency radio repeaters. Though they're painted shiny colors and covered in modern tech, the engineering behind how they send water to your faucet is actually a very ancient concept. For thousands of years, many civilizations have used this same delivery principle. The ancient Romans would dam up natural streams to create large reservoirs at high elevations, then channel that water down miles of man-made aqueducts. Before the water reached the city, it would enter a settling basin. This allowed for the velocity to slow down so debris and sediment could sink to the bottom of the basin. From there, an elaborate network of terracotta and lead pipes delivered water to public fountains, bathhouses, and even directly to private villas of the Roman elite. Most modern cities get their water from nearby rivers, large man-made reservoirs, and some from natural springs and aqueducts. From the source, it hits a water treatment facility for an elaborate sterilization process. To kill off bacteria and pathogens, it's chemically treated and sometimes beamed with UV rays. And of course, they add a little fluoride. From there, it moves to a massive underground tank called a clear well. But it doesn't just sit there. It flows through a serpentine loop, so instead of the water flowing from one side of the other directly, it slithers through a snake-like path, giving the water time to off-gas those treatment chemicals and allows any missed sediment to settle to the bottom. These massive underground tanks hold tens of millions of gallons, and we sometimes have to dive down inside those too to remove sediment. From the clear well, the water finally gets pumped into your water tower, and here's where the engineering gets interesting. Water towers don't just store water, they store energy. Think of them like a giant gravity battery. Water is heavy and height creates pressure. For every foot of elevation, you get about 0.43 psi. So a 130-foot water tower gives you roughly 56 psi, which is about what a standard building requires for the plumbing to function. Instead of every building needing its own pump, which would be a huge extra demand on the power grid and would fail during power outages, the system is centralized. At night, when electricity is cheap, the city pumps water up into the water tower, literally recharging the battery by fighting gravity. Then, at peak demand, like in the morning when everyone's showering and making coffee, the system discharges. Gravity pushes water down into the system with steady pressure, and there's no extra energy or costs required. Now that you know how water towers work, let's make the climb. The only thing I'm going to carry up is a shackle and a block so that we can hoist up our equipment a little easier from the top. I'm not going to bore anyone with a 10-minute video of climbing a ladder, but I will quickly go over the two different ways we can make the summit. There's two different styles of ladders. There's the type we're climbing today, which is a series of staggered ladders with a platform at the bottom of each span with a cage around it. That way if you slip off while you're climbing, your max fall should only be around 20 feet. Then there's the style where the ladder goes straight up in one shot with no cage, but there's a metal cable tensioned front and center of the ladder, and you link into it with an ascender that captures your progress. You link one of the pelican hooks coming off of your fall harness into this device, and it slides up the cable with you. Then if you fall off, the ascender pinches the cable and catches you. This water tower isn't equipped with that, so we have to make sure one of the 2 pelican hooks coming off of our fall harness is linked in at all times. We link one hook as high as we can reach and then grab the one below us, then move up a few steps and then link in again. Then we repeat this all the way to the top. It's a pretty slow process, but following this procedure properly makes falling to your death virtually impossible. Sounds good. Once the helmet and the umbilical is up, all that's left is the dry suit and the bailout. We also have a couple hand tools for measuring because we're going to be doing an inspection today. We have to make sure all of our equipment is secured very well. Everything's got to be tied off or really snug in your pocket, because you can absolutely not drop anything up here, because if you do and it hits someone in the head, no matter what it is, it's almost guaranteed to kill somebody. The rig we're using is especially for potable water, so we don't use it for anything else but going in water towers, so it typically doesn't have a video cable in it, because why leave an expensive video cable in an umbilical that you don't use that often? So we had to hoist a video cable up separately, and I'm going to be taping it in for about the first 50 feet. And then from there, it'll kind of just split off and be like 2 separate lines, but it'll be easy enough to manage and it won't be getting tangled in the diver. I almost forgot to add a pretty important step. Before anything goes up on the water tower or down inside, it first gets soaked in a small pool full of bleach water, and then everything gets laid out on a tarp before it gets hoisted up, so that we don't get dirt and grass all over it.
Hey, you ready for a com check?
Yeah, we got the divers suiting up now. I can get you com check.
Check 1 2, check 1 2.
Roger, fine up the compressor. While the diver's suiting up, I'm going to tie off all his clothes so they don't blow away. Then climb down to the hatch, make sure everything's secure, like the ladder he'll be climbing in with. I also have to take some pictures of the inside of the tank, the vent, the overflow, a couple different components like that, and he's ready to get in the water. After carefully assisting the diver with getting in the hatch, he'll adjust his buoyancy and then begin the inspection on the surface. He's going to swim around the surface first and take some videos and kind of just look over all the different bolts holding the seams together. First thing we're looking at here is the spillover. That makes it so that the water tower doesn't overflow. And then once he's done getting his buoyancy dialed in just right, we'll slack him off and he'll begin his descent. Slacking diver, leaving surface. The diver is going to basically spiral his way down, and as he descends, he's going to inspect every horizontal seam. He'll be keeping his eye out for things like cracks and other stress risers. But he's also recording so that engineers can also review the inspection later. As he made his way down, we started having some technical difficulties with some of our lights, as you can see. Luckily, the only light that started glitching was the light that's on the diver's helmet, so it didn't really affect the inspection camera. Diver's on bottom. Once he made it to the bottom, he was so deep I couldn't see any of his lights, and he just faded into the darkness. Don't forget to drown that like button.